much time, and I'm sure we've already decided that matter anyway and so it stands as a judgment of the House. This ruling has been repeated many, many times. On the 30th of June 1864, Sir John Packington wanted to give more money to nursery schools. Hurrah! On the 17th of May 1870, Mr Torrance wanted to relieve poverty by enabling the poor to emigrate to the colonies. On the 9th of May 1882, Henry Labouchere wanted to allow MPs to declare rather than swear an oath so as to take their seats. On the 27th of January 1891, Mr Leng wanted to limit railway workers' very long hours. On the 21st of May 1912, and this one would probably have the support of every member of this House, George Lansbury wanted to allow women to vote. Yeah. But on every single occasion, Speaker Brand, Speaker Peel, Speaker Denison, Speaker Lowther all said, no, you can't, because we've already decided that in this Parliament, in this session of Parliament. Which is why I believe we should not have the right, the government should not have the right to bring back exactly the same or substantially the same measure again and again and again as they're doing. Not least because in the end, I don't think that it's not as if the government doesn't have enough power. They get to decide every element of the timetable in the House. They get to decide what we can table, when we table it, when we sit. They can prorogue Parliament if they want to. They have plenty of power, and the one limit is they just can't keep on bringing back the same issue time and time again in the same session of Parliament because we've already decided it. And what is it that the government doesn't understand by losing a vote by more than 200 or by losing it on the second occasion by 149? And the biggest irony of all for me is the government repeatedly says the people can't have a second vote, but the House of Commons, we'll get them keeping on voting until they come up with the right answer. That's why I think we should stand by tradition, and Conservatives should be a bit more conservative about the traditions of this House and stop this ludicrous gyratory motion.
Thank you. A 3-minute limit on backbench speeches now applies. Charlie Elphick.
Mr Speaker, it is as ever a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, the member for the Rhondda, who has rightly pointed out the importance of tradition. I back Remain in a referendum, but the tradition in our country of democracy, of respecting the public votes, of respecting the 2/3 in my constituency who voted to leave the European Union means that I believe we should get on with it and that we shouldn't extend Article 50 because public trust in our democracy would be badly undermined. Yes.
One friend for giving way. The previous speaker made the point very eloquently that we should not consider the same matter again and again. Does he agree with me that that should surely apply to repeated putting of questions about second votes?
Say to the honourable gentleman, he's not been here for most of the debate. It's not order. It's not very courteous to make long interventions that slow things up. Charlie Elphick.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the point he makes. He's quite right, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. First of all, let me just underline the importance of honouring the referendum. This was the biggest democratic exercise in our history. 17.4 million people gave a clear decision that we should leave the European Union. And yet here we see Amendment H, which is seeking yet another referendum, a so-called people's vote. It's not a people's vote, it's a loser's vote, because it is promoted by the very same people who lost last time. And I have to say, I completely agree with the Labour front bench in saying that this is not something that they can support. I agree with the Right Honourable Lady for Don Valley, who made a point of order earlier on this subject. And I agree, I hope, with the majority of this House that we should vote on this vote tonight, this Amendment H, and that we should reject it. And we should put to bed for once and for all the idea that we should have any kind of further referendums, any further delays, and we should get on with leaving the European Union so we can get on with dealing with the future of this country, not having endless Brexit. And I hear that the TIG may wish to not put this motion tonight under pressure. And it will be very interesting to see what the Liberal Democrats and the SNP, who are also on signatories to this amendment, what they do. If they have the courage of their convictions, if they'll see it through, or if they will be frit and run away as they are asked to do, begged to do, by the Labour party front bench. I don't think we need to extend Article 50. I think we need to get on with it. We need not to have a referendum of the losers. We need to again listen to the British people. A snap poll held only today by YouGov found that a majority want to get on with it. 43% to 38% want MPs to vote against delay, because the British people are as sick of endless Brexit as most people in this House are. And that is why I'll be voting against every amendment tonight. I'll be voting against the main motion, making it clear that we need to honour and respect the verdict of the referendum last time. We need also to have maximum pressure on the European Union to provide an exit from the backstop, either unilaterally or by a sunset. We need not to have European elections, an affront of European elections that would see Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson and the Honourable Gentleman for Ilford would be elected as well. What we need to see is true democracy. And we also need to see some integrity. Not only that we should honour and respect the referendum, but the people who want to go and set up a new party should have the courage of their convictions, the integrity of their convictions, and face the people and put to the people the true public vote as to whether they should continue to be members of this House and not run away from the people, but face the people in a by-election and honour our democracy as we should honour the referendum.
Mr. Speaker, I will try and keep my remarks brief. Thank you very much for selecting my very last-minute hurried manuscript amendment to Amendment I in the name of my friend, the member for Leeds Central. Well, as others have said this evening, I mean, what a mess we are in. We really aren't covering ourselves in particular glory right now. And I was struck by my friend, the member for Ronda's amazing speech there and his reference to the Muppets. But it feels more to me like, well, the Muppets too, but maybe the last scenes of Thelma and Louise with the Prime Minister seems to be putting her foot ever harder on the accelerator as we're driving off the cliff while she's got banners coming off the back of her car saying it's my way or the highway. And she just keeps putting up these false choices, and this really has to stop now. It's just getting beyond a joke, as others have said. We need to find out once and for all, as we have been asking for weeks and months now, we need to find out once and for all if there are other directions of travel that this House can all agree on. And the Amendment I, in my friend's name, is the only way now, the only way. We cannot trust the government any longer to bring forward this process. It's the only way for us as Parliament to be able to express our view. And whether we want another second referendum or not, we still need to resolve what leaving the EU looks like and what this Parliament says that looks like. And for most people, that is about addressing the political declaration that sits alongside the withdrawal agreement, and that can be done in good time. There's no reason for that to take very long at all. The Secretary of State earlier on seemed to be contradicting himself that, you know, indicative votes or votes next week were going to mean a year's delay. Well, if they think it does, and this amendment passed tonight, then they need to bring forward an extension to that for that time. That's up to them to determine. So the reason for my very late and hurriedly manuscript amendment to that amendment is to try and maximise support in this House, because I know many colleagues are concerned about the forthcoming European elections, about a long extension to Article 50. But let's just remember that if this amendment is passed this evening, if we tonight say that we want an extension to Article 50, it is up for the government to come forward with the necessary legislation and the date therein to decide how long that will be for. So I hope that the House will accept my amendment to my honourable friend's amendment so that we can maximise support for that process to allow us, at long last, to have a say on the way forward.
It is astounding to be in this position when the British people made the decision in June 2016, that here we are in March 2019 debating how long we should be extending Article 54, or perhaps whether it should be actually got rid of and have a second referendum on whether we remain or leave the European Union. we need to get on with this. We need to leave decisively on the 29th of March. It is what democratically there is an expectation across the country. The 29th of March 2019 is a date in so many people's heads across the country. Millions of people, whether they voted leave, remain or abstained, are expecting us to leave on the 29th of March this year. It's not just good for democracy to deliver our promises, it's also good for business, because if there's a suspension, whether it's a short suspension, whether it's a long suspension, whether it's a series of suspensions, that's bad for business and business planning, whether that's in manufacturing or whether, for example, that's in clinical trials, life sciences, our university sector. We just have to look at the approach to the European Union when it comes to science to see why it isn't working now and won't work for the future. The Clinical Trials Directive, thought of in 2001, introduced in 2004, the EU wanted to change it to the Clinical Trials Regulation in 2016. They have thus far failed to change these regulations this year. We don't know when they're actually going to be delivered, and actually the failure to change from the directive to the regulations are holding back trials. And if these trials don't go ahead, that's life-saving, life-enhancing treatments that aren't invented, aren't brought to market to actually serve the interests of people. And the European Union are still going in the same direction. The Advocate General, against the advice of the Advocate General, the European Court of Justice decided to treat gene editing as genetically modified organisms. This means this technology will be held back in the European Union. And Professor Nigel Halford said, if adopted by the Council and Parliament, the decision could set back ag biotech in Europe by another 20 years. We are already a generation behind. Young scientists interested in ag biotech are likely to move to places where common sense and scientific evidence prevail. That is not the European Union. I believe the EU is 1950s politics trying to be applied to the 21st century. We need to leave on the 29th of March this year.
Thank you. James Frith.
Speaker, the Prime Minister is not alone in failing us. The government's backbenches are full of former ministers who claimed, "I am the man who can." The first Brexit Secretary said he could, but he couldn't. The former Foreign Secretary said he could, but he couldn't. The second Brexit Secretary said he could, but he couldn't. And now they join the hardliners on their benches who all say they can, but we know they can't. Yeah. It isn't just the Prime Minister let down by this mis-selling. The country's been misled, and now the plan has been mislaid. Ultimately, though, this comes down to a failure of the Prime Minister, of her leadership, her incapacity to build consensus, to hear what is said, and most alarmingly of all, her contempt for Parliament. This Parliament has been voted in more recently than the referendum. This Parliament has been more recently anointed its authority than the referendum. My town sent me here as someone who didn't trigger Article 50. Many, because of that fact. We're a Parliament more representative of the changing picture we see. And on at least 3 occasions in normal times, the Prime Minister's record would have cost her her job. Yeah. These 3 occasions, though, Mr. Speaker, were opportunities for her to change tack, to offer a tonic for the UK with a deal that united the country through the unity in this House. And we're told that Parliament needs to decide what it's for, yet we've been given no chance to decide. We've pored over this, many of us spending time doing the heavy lifting, understanding why the people felt so deprived of a say, felt so overlooked that they pulled the leave cord in 2016 to stop the show. So we must extend Article 50 and establish what for. Indicative votes and a process of collecting the way forward. Fill a deal with content that speaks to the support for one in this House, one with a customs union and a direction to deal with the world, with the protections of our people and our planet. And then, Mr. Speaker, take this deal and seek further permission on it. Yeah. Not from the pomp in the party opposite, but from the public. Yeah. Go back and seek further instruction from them. Let them hold it up to the light for their final say. Let Britain have her last word, to stick or twist, to back it or keep what we've got. Britain's voted to leave and remain in their millions. And then this changed Parliament was ushered in. Division is still palpable, and all the doorsteps and the polling in the country tells us there is no magic healing number. Yep. Compromise is a must. So the content of a deal with the permission of the public marry this changed Parliament to the changing picture we see. And of course, everyone reserves the right to vote the same way again. Absolutely. And at that point, I will support a deal before arguing we don't know what we've got until it's gone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to say briefly a few words about the legal advice from the European Parliament, because I have great respect for the Deputy Prime Minister, but I have concerns about the representation that he has made of the legal advice that he has received on the question of whether the European Parliament elections do or do not need to take place. I would just simply restate that in the legal advice that I have seen, it's the case that the United Kingdom would not, if it did not hold elections, the new European Parliament could validly be constituted. And that seems to me to be in complete contradiction to what the Deputy Prime Minister said earlier. So I hope when the Minister responds, he will clarify what the government's position is on that. In relation to the point made by the official spokesman for the official opposition, the member, Right Honourable and then member for Holborn and St Pancras, he said in his remarks that he thought that there were people here who were pushing a people's vote amendment for another reason. I don't think he actually specified what the other reason was, but in my case, and I think many of the people here today, we are pushing a people's vote because we want there to be a people's vote. And we want people to support that, and this will be the opportunity to do that. And frankly, we are running out of time in which to express support for a people's vote, and that is the only reason why we are doing it. Now, I do wonder whether there's any sense of humility or embarrassment from leading Brexiters about the chaos and political maelstrom that they have created. This is their responsibility through and through. They can't blame Remainers, civil servants, the weather, the Turks. They cannot even blame their nanny. The blame rests fairly and squarely on their shoulders. This is chaos that they have created. The question today, I won't give way, the question today is not whether we have an extension or not, because I think everyone here knows that we need one. When I asked the Prime Minister about this a couple of days ago, she said that she was going to work with the usual channels to see what is necessary in relation to getting legislation through the House. Now, all of us here know exactly what that means. That means the Prime Minister accepts there will have to be an extension. So the question really is whether we're having a short extension or a meaningful extension. An extension that will facilitate the will of Parliament, which has expressed a clear desire to find a different deal, and I hope an extension that will allow for a people's vote, or just a short one to enable the Prime Minister to tie up her loose ends after she has bludgeoned us black and blue with her baneful deal and her robotic mantra of it's my deal or no deal. So I hope that what we will do is we will secure a meaningful extension, and of course if that is not granted by the European Union, then as others have said here this afternoon, we will simply need to revoke Article 50.
Thank you. Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very struck as I reflect on the huge frustration my constituents feel with the way this process is going on about the speech by the Honourable Member from Christchurch, who's not in his place now. He described our government as a laughingstock in Europe and a laughingstock in this country. And I think about why is it? And I think it's because of the path that he and his colleagues have taken this government down. They have absolutely held this government to ransom, and now at a time where having argued for a long time for things that we all knew were not going to be achievable, they've won the referendum and are now blaming the government for failing to achieve it. And as my honourable friend from Bury North said just a few minutes ago, the Prime Minister put in charge of these negotiations the very people who promised us how easy it was going to be, and of course they entirely failed to deliver on the referendum result and the referendum campaign that they had promised. So I will support this motion in front of us to have a delay, but it does occur to me that the Vote Leave campaign said much throughout their campaign that this would be a careful change and it would be something that there would be time for, that we wouldn't be leaving the European Union until our future relationship was resolved. And so I'm now confused as to why they seem to be in such a rush for us to leave, when it's so clear that we haven't got a deal on which we can agree. But in terms of what my constituents ask for, it does seem that Labour's deal fulfils the vote that my 60% of Chesterfield constituents asked for. It would enable us to continue trading with the customs union, but it would also ensure that we weren't a part of the single market, that we were able to have the control on immigration that we all know was so powerful. And it was that vote on immigration that enabled what had been previously a minority concern, this concern about the European Union, to become so powerful that they were able to run on it. So I'm in a position today where, despite the fact that I hugely regret the fact that we're leaving the European Union, I will vote for Brexit. I will vote for Brexit by voting for Labour's deal. And when I vote for Labour's deal, I'll be voting for something that would enable us to leave on March the 29th. And I'll be able to go to my constituents and say that if they backed Labour's deal, if only the government would back Labour's deal, we would be able to leave the European Union on March the 29th, as we said all along. And I think it's important that that message gets across, because there's people over there suggesting that the only way of fulfilling the vote for the referendum is to vote for the government's deal. We all know there are other ways that we could leave the European Union if only they supported the deal that the Labour Party put in place.
Thank you. If members now speaking take interventions, they'll do so knowing that they're stopping colleagues speaking. So I hope they won't. Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Chesterfield. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support in particular of Amendment H in the name of my Honourable friend, the Member for Totnes, in support of a people's vote. Mr. Speaker, the people's vote is not the four of us that attended that moment just over a year ago when we launched a people's vote. Though I'm proud that the Honourable Member for Oxford West and Abingdon, the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion and the Honourable Member for Streatham and I all tonight will be true to our word and we will vote for a people's vote. We were then in the four parties. We are now, of course, in different positions. But as I say, it's not about us. We are not the people's vote. Mr. Speaker, the people's vote isn't even Susan and Linda, who go out every weekend as members of the Nottinghamshire People's Vote, not just in West Bridgford where we were on Saturday, in all weathers, but in all circumstances. They've been to Ashfield, they've been to Mansfield, they have stood and they have made the case for a people's vote, not just in bad weather, but in, frankly, other adverse conditions, and they do it with a burning passion. And they do it because they believe that our great nation has made a mistake. But they don't do it to thwart Brexit, they don't do it to stop Brexit, they do it, as I do and I know many other honourable members do as well, is because we believe with passion that this matter must now go back to the British people. It is the only way through the mess. And Mr. Speaker, one of the things that will happen, and it may be when I'm long gone, but there will undoubtedly be an inquiry into what happened, how this great country came to find itself in a position of leaving the European Union, and I gravely still fear, notwithstanding last night's vote, without a deal. And it will record that there was a lack of honesty, of courage and of leadership in this place, amongst journalists, amongst businesses, people who said things in private but simply failed to do the right thing when it was needed for our country in public. And that moment is now. And I say gently to colleagues who are in the Labour Party, many of whom I have huge respect for, and they know that I work with them cross-party on all manner of campaigns and will always continue to do so. I apologise if I caused offence by crying out shame. But I gently say to them, they know in their hearts the courage of the honourable member, my friend for Redcar, a constituency that voted leave in the number it did, but who has led in her constituency, who has persuaded the people of her constituency to back a people's vote, showing courage courage, showing honesty and showing leadership. Mr Speaker, we can't wait for the front bench. They're Brexiteers. They don't want a people's vote because they're frightened that people will change their minds. And that will be our legacy if we don't do the right thing. Knowing people didn't want it, we can't let it happen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, many people have said to me since being an MP, what is it like in this House at this time? And I've always said to them it's a very difficult time in the House and a very painful time as well in the House. And Mr Speaker, there's not just division in the lobbies, but divisions within our own parties in terms of our thoughts and our feelings around Brexit and our frustrations and our energies as well. And the disturbingness, how it feels for us, is how it feels for the public. And what plays out often in here is how the public feel and vice versa. And these are very, very difficult and trying times for us, and for us as a nation, but for individuals, for communities, for our constituencies and for our nations. It's a very, very difficult time. But the weight and the seriousness that is on us cannot be taken lightly. We are the people who need to show leadership and a direction for our country, and we need to make the right and the best decisions for that. It is not good for us to be throwing out our own selfish, sometimes views, and sometimes our strong opinions, which actually are for ourselves and not thinking in the wider context. And that's something that we need to consider. Now, I absolutely think and agree that we should have voted down that deal that we did, the meaningful vote. And we did that the first time, the second time. There is no point in bringing it to the House a third and a fourth time. This is a waste of time and a waste of time for our chamber, and that should not be happening. What we should be doing is thinking and mapping out a way forward. And the way forward is to extend Article 50. There is no other way forward than us to do that and then to consider how we move forward with that. But what we are also doing, as we have our conversations, we are failing to tackle some of the issues that need to be tackled in our country, where people are suffering, where people are in grief because of what is being missed, because it's not being discussed and decisions are not being made in this chamber. And that is things like in-work poverty. It's real, it's tangible. The housing crisis, it's real, it's tangible. Climate change, we're in a crisis at the moment. Our education needs improving. These are the things that we need to be thinking about, and so many other things, including our public services and tackling serious youth violence. It is not good enough just to invest in the police. It is a partnership, and we should be investing in partnerships to do things in terms of tackling this. So I will be supporting an extension of Article 50, and I will be inviting others to join me in doing that.
Harry Black.
I think that's where the confusion is.
After sitting through the entirety of this debate, I think that the UK is about to get a rude awakening as to what the consequences of this Prime Minister's irresponsibility are going to be. The reality of where we are just now is that even if we do come to a consensus to extend Article 50, any one of the 27 countries in the EU could veto that extension. We already know that Farage and his pals have been round lobbying different countries like Italy, Hungary, Poland. And it's ironic that he wants other countries to block the will of the very parliament that he apparently wants to have so much control. But like I say, all it takes is one country out of 27, and we are out on the 29th with no deal. Because the EU is a nation of equals. Now that we can see the no-deal train coming down the tracks towards us, we have all these new suggestions coming out the woodwork. Rumours of cross-party consensus for an EFTA-type deal, or to stay in the single market or the customs union. We proposed this 2 years ago, and it was ignored. And the thing is, people of Scotland will be watching this, and despite being told to vote no to stay in the EU, despite voting remain in the EU, despite sending back a majority of MPs on an anti-Brexit manifesto twice, it's still ignored, and despite the Scottish Government putting forward compromise proposals, here we are anyway. And I challenge one unionist member in this place to tell me what more we could do on these benches that we haven't done to prevent Scotland being dragged out of the EU and into no-deal chaos. Now, I can hear the voices saying you should have voted for the deal, but they just make my case for me, because even if every single Scottish MP did support the Prime Minister's deal, she'd still have lost. So it makes no sense. This is not a union of equals. And it gets summed up best by a good friend of mine and a former member of this place, actually, Jim Sillars. And he summed it up best when he talked about Scottish independence. And he said that on the 18th of September, between the hours of 7 AM and 10 PM, Scotland is in control of its own future. And the question is whether at 1 minute past 10 we hand back that power or we keep it for ourselves. Now, we chose to hand that power back to this place, and look what has happened. And I tell you, Mr. Speaker, if this is a union of equals, then the next time that Scotland is asked whether we want to be part of this union, I'll bet my money that the answer's different.
Weston! Mr. Weston.
Speaker, I rise in support of amendments E, I and J. The Prime Minister has made a huge mistake. She has not sought to unify this country, to reunite us, but to reunite her party. Since the 10th of December, it's been abundantly clear that there isn't a majority in this House for the Prime Minister's deal. 3 months on, she still insists it's her deal or no deal. Her approach has been flawed from the start, and what has led to us being in this humiliating, disastrous mess. Rather than reach out across the country and across Parliament, the Prime Minister asserted her infamous red lines and is focused on securing her legacy. Now we must exhaust other realistic options in a short time frame to understand where there is a majority in this House for some form of Brexit. We owe it to this country that has been misled not once but twice, first by the promises of the Leave campaign and secondly by the disingenuous claims of the Prime Minister that hers was the only way of delivering Brexit. For several months I've been making it clear that I believe it incumbent on this House, as representatives of a presently very divided nation, to work collaboratively to find solutions to this impasse with a primary aim of seeking to heal those divisions. We must work to determine those forms of Brexit that are A, realisable and B, least damaging to the UK and to Europe. To enable this, it is essential that we extend Article 50. And as I said very publicly back in mid-November, we must do that and confirm it with the EU and then decide on which of those Brexit options which has the most public support. Let me be clear. Yes, I support a public vote, as I said before, and I believe this place cannot decide what form of Brexit we follow. But today's votes and the public must confirm that this is what they wanted versus Remain. Today's votes are all about achieving an extension to Article 50 that will facilitate the right outcome that's in the best interest of this country. If won, we must then agree across this House the mechanisms for achieving this. And Amendment I believe, does that. And finally, let me be clear. Yes, I voted Remain, and I favour Remain. As someone who sits on the International Trade Select Committee, it is obvious that coming out of the European Union on the 29th of March is the first paragraph of the first chapter of a very long book. It will last for 8 to 10 years. Mr. Speaker, for that reason, and more importantly, in the ambition of trying to reunify this country of ours, and for the reasons of avoiding the economic catastrophe so described by business leaders and CBI and the SMMT and the FSB, we must extend Article 50 and find a majority agreement across this House. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Jonathan Edwards.
Mr. Speaker, the key question that will face us after this evening, if we support an extension to Article 50, will be for what purpose? And before I explain my party's position, I would like to add my voice to those who have been calling for the House of Commons to have a full portfolio of votes on the various options. On January the 15th, Mr. Speaker, I wrote an article for the Huffington Post making the case for the use of a voting system designed to create a majority. And I was delighted to see the Father of the House bring forward an amendment to that effect a few weeks ago. And I hope if Amendment I passes this evening, that will be looked at with all seriousness. Without finding a purpose for that extension, we still face the prospect of a no deal by default. And we had a great idea, we had a wide idea yesterday with the publishment of the British Government's tariff proposals of what that would mean. and indeed it will be a disaster for Welsh agriculture in particular, because if we set very high import tariffs, that will be reciprocated in terms of exports, and half of all Welsh lamb, of course, goes to the European Union, and they will be decimated. Of course, in keeping an open border between the Republic of Ireland and the north of Ireland, the British government signalled its intention to sink the ports of my country. This evening, Mr. Speaker, we put forward Amendment A, and essentially what that does is to extend Article 50 to cover Phase 2 of the Brexit process. That would help deal with the backstop, and although I do not share the concerns of honourable members in relation to the backstop, that will be dealt with our suggestion. It will deal with the problems of a blind Brexit. It will deal also with the problem of a no deal, and it will also encourage a more sensible approach to the trade negotiations. I think there's something for everybody in our suggestion, Mr. Speaker, apart from those who seem obsessed with leaving on the 29th of March. And to close, Mr. Speaker, I look forward this evening to voting for Amendment H. And I say to Labour colleagues that the right moment doesn't always come in politics. There's only the moment, and the moment is now.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister set out the timetable for this week a couple of weeks ago, she did not say that the vote on an extension was to be linked to the acceptance of the deal. In fact, when she set out those arrangements, the premise was that we would come to this point after the defeat of her deal, which is what has happened. And now we find, in her reaction to the vote last night, that the government's proposal to extend Article 50 is linked to their strategy of one more heave, two more heaves, however many more heaves it takes. The amendment I'll support tonight, the front bench amendment moved by my honourable friends or my honourable friend from Leeds Central, seeks to remove that conditionality and to extend instead for the purpose of clarifying our future direction. And that is the reason that we should do it. Because for 4 months, we have been having the wrong conversation with Europe. Instead of disappearing into 5 different levels of legality over the backstop, which looks to the rest of Europe as though we're trying to wriggle out of our commitment to having no hard border in Northern Ireland and our commitment to support the Good Friday Agreement, we should have been having the conversation that we need to have about what Brexit really means, what the choices are and what the trade-offs are. And let us not pretend that the reason that that hasn't happened is that somehow it's impossible until we leave. The reason it hasn't happened is because to do so would expose the deep divisions within the Conservative Party. But the public deserves better than that. So that's why extension should be for the purpose of clarification. And I just say this on timing and other conditions in this. Far too often in our discussion, we forget that there are 2 sides round the table. An extension has to be applied for and it has to be agreed unanimously. It won't just be up to us how long this is for, and it's important, whatever happens in the votes tonight, that we understand that. And let me say one other thing, Mr. Speaker. I understand the public impatience with politics right now. It's our job to get stuff done. But the leadership response to parliamentary votes matters. And we had a great speech here yesterday from my honourable friend, the member for Yardley, defending parliamentary democracy. It is just a pity that our Prime Minister, the leader of our country, never defends parliamentary democracy, because continually setting up Parliament against the people is at best disappointing, it is thoroughly irresponsible, and it is not the leadership that we need through these troubled waters.
As the clock strikes 4:44, the honourable gentleman for Ilford South must sit down. Mike Gapes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, when we debated Article 50 and I voted against invoking it, I said we were going to go onto an escalator with no brake and no way of getting off. I now understand why the Prime Minister invoked Article 50 at that time. It was because she wanted to stop a European Parliament election.
Yeah.
And the reality is that the whole timetable of agreeing an Article 50 process 18 months before the government had even got an agreed position, which lasted about 3 days before the resignations, was driven by fear internally in the Conservative Party. They did not want UKIP to come back in a European election, so they triggered it at that point. The reality is they are now trying to get us out as quickly as possible, and I have to say amendments which talk about the end of June are also trying to get us out because of people's fear of a European election. The reality is, if we do not have a European election, we will have no voice, no say and no vote within the councils of Europe in a period where we may still be in a transition, and that will give us a great period of weakness in any future framework negotiations. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, this country in the 1970s was the sick man of Europe. We are now the joke of Europe.
Kneeling while speaking is a new phenomenon in the House of Commons. Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are in a desperate position, and that's been reflected in many serious speeches, too many to list, but that of my honourable friend, the member for Rhondda, was a real highlight, and we support his Amendment J. In her closing remarks yesterday, the Prime Minister said that the House needed to say not what it didn't want, but what it did want. And it's a fair point. But the problem we face is due to her refusal to give us that opportunity at the start of the process. And she herself went to the EU27, not with clarity on what she wanted, but red lines on what she didn't want. Red lines that boxed her into a corner and produced this damaging deal that fails the country and has been rejected twice by historic margins. And so what's her reaction, Mr. Speaker? Try again. It was my right honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, who coined the phrase meaningful vote when seeking to ensure that Parliament had a role in this process. It's a phrase that the Prime Minister has embraced. We had meaningful vote 1, meaningful vote 2. But how, as the right honourable member for Putney pointed out, can meaningful vote 3 be meaningful in any sense of the word? On the 26th of February, the Prime Minister set out the process for this week. Vote on her deal, vote on no deal, then vote on an extension. And she set out the options to be considered at that stage. Her deal, no deal, another deal, or a public vote. Well, Mr. Speaker, this week we have ruled out 2 of those options, so we should now be looking at the other 2 and seeing what consensus can be built. As the honourable member for Eddisbury, my right honourable friend, the member for Normanton, Pontefract and Castle, the member for Bury North and the member for Lewisham East, among others, pointed out. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor was right when he reminded the nation this morning on the radio that the 2016 referendum decision was carried by a narrow margin. A painfully narrow margin, not the overwhelming mandate that some opposite claim. A vote to leave, but not an instruction to rupture our relationship with our closest neighbours and allies. And if there was any doubt, the Prime Minister gave the people a second vote. She called a general election, accusing this House of trying to thwart her plans and seeking a mandate for a hard Brexit. And she lost her majority. She could then have reached out to build a consensus, or she could have, after her deal was defeated in January. But she did not. Yes, she spoke to people across the House, but she didn't listen to what they had to say. She focused on the backstop, which may be an obsession of the party within her party, but is not the primary concern of the majority of the 432 MPs who voted against her deal. Of far more concern to us is the way that deal damages our economy, damages jobs, damages livelihoods, and damages public services. And it doesn't offer the certainty that business needs. The political declaration is deliberately ambiguous, and we know that there are those on her benches who intend to remove her and to rip it up if she gets her deal over the line. Last night, the Prime Minister had another chance to reach out and build consensus, to deliver on the expectations that she had given the House, creating the opportunity to explore all the options and find a way forward. Mr. Speaker, the government's shameful decision to go back on their word and frustrate our democracy with this motion should be rejected by the House. Our Amendment E provides the way forward that this House expected and that this House wanted. And it wouldn't have been necessary, as my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, pointed out, if the government was doing its job. The Prime Minister should also listen to her Chancellor when however much he proclaims support for her deal, he recognises that it's dead and that she should reach out across the House to look at the sort of deal that might be forged around a customs union, single market alignment, and membership of the agencies and partnerships we've built together. And indeed, a further public vote between a credible leave option and remaining in the European Union, a vote which we support. An extension needs clear purpose, a purpose of building the consensus that the Prime Minister has failed to do. An extension that is as short as possible, but as long as necessary. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have seen the folly of fixed deadlines. We warned the House and the Prime Minister that throwing red meat to her Brexit extremists by fixing the 29th of March in law was a mistake. And now she will have to legislate to remove it. And we should also reject her new bullying tactic that failing to back her deal means UK participation in the European elections. It does not, as many members, notably the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe, pointed out. Powerful legal voices have been cited, but let me quote a government minister on this issue. The Advocate General for Scotland, speaking in another place on the 27th of February, said, and I quote, "The noble Lord's point that the European Parliament could sit without the UK having had an election is correct." Mr. Speaker, we must not be deflected by threats. We cannot succumb to the Prime Minister's obstinacy. Her deal has been rejected. No deal has been rejected. We must now seek the extension of Article 50, needed to move on and to consider the remaining options. A different deal or a further public vote.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Secretary of State opened this debate. He has long indicated his commitment to a second referendum and for remaining in the European Union. I disagree with him, but I respect the integrity with which he holds that position. Others in this House, like the member for Nottingham East, have been prepared to make the difficult decision to leave their party to make the case for a second referendum. Few doubt the sincerity with which the Right Honourable Member holds such views. But the Amendment E, Mr. Speaker, tabled in the name of the Leader of the Opposition, does not reflect such principle or integrity. It is fundamentally flawed. The European Council statement of 12th March makes clear that any extension to Article 50 must be on the basis of providing clarity on both its duration and give credible justification. Yet the Leader of the Opposition's amendment meets neither of these two tests. Firstly, it does not clarify the duration that it seeks to extend for.
Perhaps that's because she's not in her place, but the Right Honourable Member for Islington South and Finsbury said on Saturday that Labour would back an extension only to July because it would be inappropriate for us to stand for the European Parliament. But just the next day, the Shadow Chancellor contradicted her, saying that an extension should be as long as necessary. To be fair, the member for Manchester Central, in her manuscript amendment, does address the issue of duration in terms of the Amendment I from the member for Leeds Central. But the Leader of the Opposition fails to do so. Secondly, he does not set out
a big defeat as the government's own proposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we thought he himself actually used to support a second referendum, but he failed to even mention it in his intervention. But the point is, the Leader of the Opposition called this week for cross-party consensus. This is from someone who refused even to meet with the Prime Minister, who actually met her once after weeks of delay and has blocked his front bench from engaging with the government. When he talks of cross-party consensus, perhaps what he really means is actually having meetings with the member for West Bromwich East. There is no limit to the inconsistencies of his approach. He talks, Mr. Speaker, of listening to this House. And yet when this House spoke on his amendment on the 27th of February, defeating it by 323 votes to 240. He failed to listen to that judgment. So today, Mr. Speaker, he presents an amendment that fails the test set out by the European Commission on Tuesday, that calls for cross-party talks when he himself has resisted them, and calls for listening to this House when he fails to do so for his own amendment. I'll give way once more.
The Right Honourable Member for giving way. This country is on the edge of an economic precipice. We want some leadership from the government. We don't want you to be sitting there giving pot shots at the last moment against the opposition.
Well, then he may have a word with the Leader of the Opposition so he puts forward credible proposals that have not already been ruled out by the European Union and failed to address the statement issued just 2 days ago. Let me turn, in the limited time left, Mr. Speaker, to Amendment I. And the member for Leeds Central raised a specific point in his remarks when he said that we needed to vote for that amendment because the House would not have a vote on another amendable motion until after the 29th of March. We will make our statement under Section 13.4 tomorrow, setting out how the government proposes to proceed in relation to negotiations, and so there will be the option of an amendable motion no later than Monday the 25th of March. The Amendment I, Mr. Speaker, from the Honourable Member for Rhondda raised an issue which I think, Mr. Speaker, you have already addressed in your response to the member for Wallasey. So I won't dwell on that other than to suggest that it is an issue for the Chair and it will be shaped by the motion that is brought forward by the government. In respect of Amendment H put forward by the member for Totnes, it is clear government policy to resist a second referendum and that policy has not changed. Mr. Speaker, I've
2 minutes left, and I'm given away a couple of times already. Mr. Speaker, it was Tony Blair who said that the way to stop Brexit was first to vote against the Prime Minister's deal, then to vote against no deal, and then to seek a long extension. It is votes on Tuesday, Wednesday and tonight. This is the precise script followed by the Leader of the Opposition. Perhaps he should share with us whether it was Tony, Peter or Alistair that wrote it for him. How proud those envoys of the elite must be with his late conversion to the cause. His approach has become more Davos than Don Valley. Some members of this House will remember the painting from Banksy that went through the shredder. Indeed, the member for Ribble Valley had it on his Christmas card. The reality in his approach this week, Mr. Speaker, is he is shredding the votes of 17.4 million people in this country, with his turning his back on the referendum, going back on his word from his own manifesto, failing to listen even to his own front bench. The member for Ashton-under-Lyne was saying just last night, I think that it would be disastrous for us to, as members of Parliament, go back to the people, the very issue that others in his party are campaigning for. Mr. Speaker, this is a time for responsibility, yet we have a motion from the Leader of the Opposition that ducks the choice, ducks the time, ducks the clarity, ducks any sense of national responsibility. It is time for this House to act in the national interest. It is time to put forward an extension that is realistic. I commend the motion put forward by the government to the House.
Order! Order. Under the order of the House of today, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the motion. I begin by calling the Honourable Member for Totnes, Dr Sarah Wollaston, to move Amendment H. Formally. Thank you. I remind the House that if Amendment H is agreed to, Amendments I and E fall. The question is that Amendment H be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that Amendment H be made. As many as are that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tell us for the ayes, Joan Ryan and Stephen Gethins. Tell us for the noes, Joe Churchill and Paul Maynard. Lock the doors!
The ayes to the right, 85, and the noes to the left, 334.
The ayes to the right, 85. The noes to the left, 334. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. No, not now. We'll deal with point of order later. We now come to Amendment I. Mr. Hilary Benn to move the amendment formally. Move formally? Formally, thank you. I now call Lucy Powell to move formally her amendment to Amendment I. Move formally, thank you. The question is that the amendment to Amendment I be made. As many as I've thought of it, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that the amendment to Amendment I be made. As many as I've been and say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith. Jeff comes before Nick in the alphabet. Tellers for the noes, Joe Churchill and Paul Maynard. Lock the doors! Order! Order!
The ayes 311, the noes 314.
Thank you.
The ayes to the right 311, the noes to the left 314. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. The question is that Amendment I be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that Amendment I be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith. Tell us for the noes, Joe Churchill and Paul Maynard.
to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314.
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. But we now come to Amendment E. In the name of the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Gentleman to move the amendment formally.
I so move, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that Amendment E be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby! Order. The question is that Amendment E be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith. Tellers for the noes, Joe Churchill and Paul Maynard. Lock the doors! Order.
The ayes to the right, 302, and the noes to the left, 318.
The ayes to the right, 302. The noes to the left, 318. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. Order. We now come to Amendment J in the name of the Honourable Gentleman Member for Rhondda.
I don't think there's any need to move this to a vote, is there?
Thank you. Amendment J for Jemima, not moved. Order. The question is the main motion in the name of the government. Members of the government, as many as are that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is the main motion as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Mike Freer and Alistair Jack. Tellers for the noes. Tellers for the noes, Peter Bone and William Ragg. Applause! Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, after the last few days of government chaos and some defeats, all of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution to the crisis facing this country, where the government has so dramatically failed to do so. We've begun to hold meetings with members across the House to find a consensus and a compromise that meets the needs of this country. But the last few days have also put a responsibility on the Prime Minister. First, to publicly accept that both her deal and no deal are simply no longer viable options. And secondly, to bring forward the necessary legislation to amend the exit date of the 29th of March. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate our conviction that a deal can be agreed based on our alternative plan that can command support across the House. And I also reiterate our support for a public vote, not as a political... Mr. Speaker, not as political point scoring, but as a realistic option to break the deadlock. The whole purpose, Mr. Speaker, the whole purpose ought to be to protect communities that are stressed and worried. Those people are worried about the future of their jobs and their industries. Our job is to try to meet the concerns of the people who sent us here in the first place.
No, there's no further required. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are in a crisis, and of course we're at the end of another week. And we need to remind ourselves that the public of the United Kingdom are just 2 weeks away from potentially crashing out of the European Union. Mr. Speaker, while we've been debating here, the trade bill has been going through the other place. And importantly, in the other place, an amendment has been passed that disallows the trade bill if no deal is not taken off the table. Can I seek your advice as to how we can make sure that this House has the ability to debate the trade bill over the course of the coming days and presents the opportunity that we can use legislation to make sure that no deal can happen? That's the responsible position that we should be taking. If I may say so, utter hypocrisy from the Labour Party. They punked the opportunity to put people's vote on the agenda tonight.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman, amendments to be considered at the point at which the bill returns. That's the factual situation. There's nothing that I can add at this point. Did I detect the right honourable gentleman, member for Leeds Central? Point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Further to the very important announcement that the Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union made in his closing speech tonight, that the government intends to bring the neutral motion required under Section 13 of the European Union Withdrawal Act to the House by Monday the 25th of March. I wonder whether the Leader of the House, who is in her place, might like to indicate to the House this evening, given the nature of the business that has already been announced for next week, whether the government might be inclined to bring it before Monday the 25th, because we really need to get on with the process of trying to agree a way forward.
To the right honourable gentleman for his point of order, which of course is not a matter for the chair. The leader can come to the box if she... the right honourable gentleman's getting overexcited. He's a young pup. I mean, he's a new young member, and I know he requires encouragement. If the right honourable lady wants to come to the box, she can, but she's not under any obligation.
Really, just to say, I will of course take into account the right honourable gentleman's concerns.
We're grateful.
Oh, very well, Dr. Lewis. Spit it out quickly, man.
Well, as what you described as a relatively new member, I was rather puzzled by the leader of the opposition saying something about a people's vote. Is there any way within the rules of order one can register the fact that as more than half the House of Commons voted against a second referendum tonight, the fact that so many of them abstained has nothing to do with it and the matter is completely dead?
Right honourable gentleman has registered his view with his usual force, and we are grateful to him. I don't think he's interested in a response from me, and he'll be pleased to know that he's not getting such. Now, no further to that point of order. Point of order, Laura Smith.
Thank you for allowing me to make this point of order, Mr. Speaker. It is on an unrelated matter to today's proceedings, but I believe it is of the utmost importance. Yesterday, the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip made disgusting comments on LBC Radio regarding historical sexual abuse and investigations being a waste of money. His exact words, Mr. Speaker, were "spat money up the wall," a well-known colloquialism for ejaculation. I represent a constituency where many survivors of sexual abuse at the hands of the predatory paedophile Barry Bonnell live. I represent a constituency where men like Gary Cliff and Steve Walters and many others spoke about the abuse they suffered, resulting in the imprisonment of Barry Bonnell. They did this after decades of struggle dealing with the shattering consequences of being abused. I represent a constituency...
Order, resume your seat. I've got the thrust of it, but I cannot allow a great speech to be made. Sorry. If there's a request, please. The Honourable Lady has made her point with very considerable force and eloquence, but I know she's approaching her last sentence. Laura.
I understand that the member did not make the comments in the House, but that should not place him beyond reproach. What advice can you give that I might pass on to those affected in Crewe and Nantwich as how to best proceed to hold this member to account for his actions, which in my opinion fall far below the standards expected of parliamentarians?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order, and what I would say to her is twofold. First of all, she can, and I suspect will, engage with the member concerned, perhaps by correspondence, to register very forcefully her views. Secondly, if she wishes to approach that member directly, in, I know, a very seemly but robust way, she can do that. And thirdly, what I would say to her is that she can send to her constituents a copy of the official report of today, in which this very forceful and clear point of order from her and my response to it will be recorded. And by the way, in interrupting, I intended absolutely no discourtesy to her. I just wanted to expedite proceedings. But she has made her point with great force, and it will be communicated to her constituents and to those at whom it was directed. Oh, very well. All right.
This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service.